Hi everyone, and welcome to week 3 of Speak Out Revolution Design Her In campaign. This week we're going to be talking about pregnancy, maternity, and return to work for women working across the engineering sector. We'll be looking at quotes that women have anonymously submitted, and Frances and I will be discussing our experience of those.
Today, for our pregnancy, maternity, and return to work discussion as part of Design Her In, we are going to talk about maternity leave. So I've got a few comments here, but I'd love to get your input on your maternity leave. And we'll also refer this back to one of the posts we've done recently on how men needs to be designed into this process to enable us to have equality. Mm-hmm. So for maternity, the first comment here is, the director told me that the girl going on maternity leave would never be any use again. Her brain's turned to mush now.
My response.
I know, I'm shocked that is an acceptable thing of anyone seeing you to say about any of their staff members, regardless of their pregnancy status.
This is our senior leadership in the engineering sector. I think, that wraps it up. These are the people that we're depending on to drive gender equality across the sector so we can create innovative solutions. So, that's inspiring for me. But I think it shows you just how far we need to go. When people in senior leadership positions are openly saying these things in our workplaces, come on.
The next one is denied promotion interview whilst on maternity leave. Every other applicant interviewed, it says, well, you will regress while you're on maternity leave. Oh, okay. So apart from this not being a full sentence, it basically is talking about her being denied promotion interview, and because she's regressing on maternity leave, and it's just expected that she wouldn't get a promotion interview because she's on maternity leave. I don't feel like that should be a barrier.
No, and I think that's a really overt version of what I experienced of the, when you're having those informal conversations about roles and people are like, they don't say it, but they're like, well, you're going on maternity leave and we'd really like to recruit for the role at this point in time. So, maybe the timings just really haven't worked out here. And really what they're saying is you're going on maternity leave, so we don't want you, so don't bother applying. So that happens all the time. It happens all of the time. And but the point about regressing while you're on maternity leave, I think that is wildly inaccurate, and it's a massive assumption. When I was on my maternity leave, I did a lot of voluntary work for the Women's Infrastructure Network. I did my pro bono work while I was on maternity leave on a project that ordinarily I wouldn't have worked on. So actually, by the end of my maternity leave, I felt like, one, I hadn't regressed, but two, it gave me the opportunity to work on things that were outside of my kind of core working life, which I think added value to my skill set and my experience. So I think that's a massive assumption, a massive negative assumption that people should get rid of and empty from their minds.
Definitely, because we've seen this with our Speak Out Talks manager, Wamit, who volunteered for us while she was still on maternity leave as well. She'd never have got the opportunity otherwise.
Absolutely.
And the final one, which I think will invoke a lot more discussion, is changing my role whilst I was on maternity leave to a demotion. And I know at my organisation, they only hold my role for me for 6 months. So if I'm off for longer than 6 months, I will not necessarily come back to the same role I left. They'll find me another role in the organisation, but I might not come to my same role. And I don't know whether this is common across the board.
So that's it. That is defined in our legislation. I think that's the law. If you take longer than 6 months, organisations do not have to hold your role. But I think that it's even what we're talking about here. I see it a lot in the Speak Out survey responses, and I think it's slightly, I think it's slightly different or far more worse than what we're talking about. I see it where women will go on maternity leave and then they'll return to their role, and they'll have had someone fill the role or something like this. And actually what happens is they don't return to that same role. They have responsibilities removed from them and opportunities removed from them and given to other people. And essentially they have a detriment to them, because they're coming back to a role that isn't that's in a worse position or state than what they left in, but in terms of like level and influence and opportunities available to them. This is really common. I think we see this a lot in the survey.
I'm not sure whether this comment falls into the return to work section that we're going to talk about next, or whether it falls into this one. However, the comment about ask whether I've enjoyed my year off.
Do you know?
I think the misconception of the fact that you've taken a year for maternity leave and that it's been a holiday is a very common one.
Yeah, I think misconception is not a strong enough word in this case. Do you know what? And this is reinforced by government. Like, just look at the challenge to the, I think it's like this SEISS payment. So essentially, women that are furloughed or whatever get less pay if they took maternity leave during the time over the last 3 years or something like this. And it was rightly challenged by, in my opinion, Pregnant Then Screwed. And essentially what the government is saying is maternity leave is the equivalent to taking time off work or being a bit sick. And like, let's get real. I mean, this government's been relying on women forever to do all of the vital unpaid work for society. And they basically don't want to change that, because why would they want to stop oppressing women? It reinforces their power system, doesn't it?
Yeah, and this is actually a very good point about the pay side and the furlough. I know from two different friends that they weren't able to get the mortgage that they wanted for their next property because the maternity pay period was taken into account and they weren't on their full salary in the period where they wanted to move afterwards. It was probably like a year after they had taken the maternity leave, but obviously that still counted towards their mortgage application. Yeah. And this prevented them getting the mortgage that they needed to move because of their maternity reduced pay. And I think that needs to be reevaluated, because they're back on their full-time pay, and that's their full-time pay that they're expected to be on. And yet the mortgage companies still are not addressing that as their payment.
Yep. And who does it affect? It doesn't affect men, does it? It just affects women. So how it's not discriminatory, I don't know. Like, not acceptable.
No, a lot of the things that are in place and the legislation and rules that are in place are where men were the breadwinners and women stayed at home. And that's not the case anymore. And man's salary is not always, well, a lot of the time is not able to sustain a household anymore with the rate that things have increased. So things need to change to reflect that. How did you feel whilst you were on maternity leave about being disconnected from work? How did that make you feel?
So I was really quite lucky, because I'd been working remotely for 3.5 years, something like that. So it was very normal for me to, have remote meetings, call people, WhatsApp people in the team. And I would say that I kept really well connected through the voluntary and pro bono work that I did. Well, it wasn't an issue, but I know that there are people in my network that when they were pregnant, their manager basically, did their, congratulations, you're going up on maternity leave, didn't speak to them once, didn't invite them to any of the team events, like just basically ghosted them or whatever it's called. And then they had to contact them when they were thinking about going back to work. So I know that these experiences are really different and variable for people across the engineering sector.
And I can imagine for a manager, they might not know how much contact they should have, or whether they don't want to interrupt them whilst on maternity leave, just in case they're stressed and they need to be away from work. However, I think that needs to be a conversation beforehand rather than the manager just ignoring it.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because I was having chats with someone who worked in an organization in the engineering sector. And they basically said they, as a manager or people leader, they received no training on this, no real training on how to deal with someone who is going through pregnancy and maternity and return to work. And it's kind of alarming, right? Because when you speak to people and understand like who had a good experience, who had a bad experience, the common denominator in my conversations has been whether or not your manager is female. So typically women, but this is not based on data, this is just on conversations that I have had. When managers have been female, the experience has been much better for the member of staff because they can relate to the situation and they can have those conversations. But for male managers, they're not trained, they don't know anything about being pregnant. Maybe they've seen it happen. But what I found through the conversations was they just handled it really, really badly to the detriment of the woman, which is obviously a real shame. And as you know, in the engineering sector, 80% of our leadership is male. So 80% of instances, it's more likely that this will happen than not.
Yeah, and actually this comes back to both me and Marie were talking to our other halves about what they'd want to learn through this process. And the first thing that my other half said was that he wanted to understand how to help staff on maternity leave and how to deal with that. Because he knows there's a few staff members in his team that will probably go off maternity leave in the next few years, and he wants to be able to equip them and handle that as best as he can. And I was shocked that was the first thing that he decided, but it's obviously something that has been playing on his mind. We've got a few friends that are pregnant right now, and he just doesn't know how to handle it because he's never been equipped or trained for it, and I've never been pregnant, so he's not been through that. And I feel that as a female manager, I've not been pregnant, and I've got no idea what I do, and I would do it as a conversation, but it might be easier for me because I'm female and I can sort of say like, what do you need from me, and touch base with them. And maybe it is harder for men, but it shouldn't be. They need to be empowered and enabled to do that, and they need to be trained. We know people manager, line manager training is shockingly bad across the board. Like they don't equip people, especially people from a technical background who's moved into people management. It's not the best way to do things.
Yeah, in engineering, it's like, oh my gosh, you are good at maths. You're an amazing, let's promote you into people management and then train you with nothing and expect you to be amazing at it, which just never happens.
Exactly. They need to train and equip their staff properly, and they don't.
Absolutely. And I think the point that you mentioned about Pete, that really just reinforces what, the conversations that I was having with people that have been through this before. Like, people aren't trained, which is shocking, really. Like, if you're responsible for the welfare and well-being of staff, female staff, who are more likely to get pregnant, then, and you don't know how to handle or deal with that, how can you expect that situation? How can you expect the employee experience to be great for a woman? You can't.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that furlough will have changed this thought process, because everyone who's off on furlough is going through a very same career gap thing where they're away from the workplace, they're not touching base, but our managers keeping in touch with them. I know that I only had one staff on furlough, and I annoyed her every week just to check she was okay. However, that needs to be standard practice, having that conversation of what the expectations are, and I hope furlough has changed people's perception. However, I don't think they'll have related it to the two.
Yeah, I hope to. I hope.
These were mine and Marie's experiences. Tell us yours in the comments.